Hello, little toads. Grammy here with a chapter from Soup on Ice, chapter 11 to be precise. The picture on here is intriguing. It looks to me what we've got is Slosh dressed up like Santa Claus with Rob and Luther Luther and Soup. With Rob, let's see, it would be Rob and Soup on board with him. And it looks like this sleigh, it's got a horse pulling it. It looks like it's got some kind of a sail on it. Remember that Lake Champlain? He's always talking about the wind blowing really hard on Lake Champlain. So it looks like possibly Santa's sleigh is going to be driven by the wind with the sail. At least that's what that picture's telling me. Let's give it a go. Rob, here goes, said Soup. Christmas Eve had finally arrived. The two of us stood in front of Slosh's hot time pool parlor, looked at each other, and snickered. Other than Miss Boland, Soup and I were the only ones in learning who knew the amusing fact that Santa Claus would be played this evening by the man with the meanest reputation in town, Mr. Stanley Dubinsky, locally known as Slosh. We knocked. The door opened, and the monster himself looked down at us. Slosh filled the entire entrance. He was carrying an enormous sack of stuff. Ho, he boomed. Well, I'm ready. Where do I change into my Santa Claus costume? Soup swallowed. Up north of here. Your Santa Claus outfit is out Mulligan's Road, right near Mr. Joe Sutter's place. Mr. Dubinsky blinked. Mulligan's Road? Soup nodded. I noticed that my pal had somehow failed to mention his mysterious machine, or whatever it was the Soup intended to assemble from the stuff in Mr. Sutter's barn. Okay, sighed Slosh. How do we get there? Don't you have a car? I asked in a timid voice. Mr. Dubinsky shook his head. No, thanks. I wouldn't own one because I never liked riding in them blankety blank things. Going fast makes me nervous, and I turn ornery. Them gas fumes make me sick. Soup forced a smile. Fine, we'll hoof it. But we really have to hurry home or we'll be late for the tree lighting. It was a long hike from the center of town all the way north along the lake to the very end of Mulligan's Road. The evening was cold, the north wind was blowing hard and into our faces, but we kept going. Not having too much time, at first we ran, then trotted, and finally walked. By the time we reached Mr. Sutter's, Soup and I, little as we were almost carrying poor old Mr. Dubinsky. He still, however, hung on tightly to his sack. I wondered what was inside the sack, but was too afraid to ask its puffing owner. How much further? He wheezed. We're here, I told him. Thank heaven. Mr. Slosh Dubinsky collapsed into a heap against the high snowbank beside the road. I ain't young no more. We can't rest now, Mr. Dubinsky said, Soup, or we'll be late arriving at the tree. Slosh rolled his eyes. Oh no, he panted weakly. We got to gallop all the way back? Soup gave his big shoulder a gentle pat. Don't worry, sir. We got a surprise for you. You won't have to walk hardly a step. In fact, you'll be riding in style. Mr. Dubinsky's eyes widened, a look of genuine fright. Riding? Riding in what? Soup smiled. In your Santa Claus sleigh, or rather, in Mr. Sutter's. But don't you worry. There won't be any stinky old engine, no gasoline fumes to make you sick. As you know, a sleigh goes very slowly. Good, said Mr. Dubinsky. Gradually, he regained his feet, shouldered his bulging sack, and even smiled. Gee, he said, it's going to be fun being Santa Claus. Let's go, I told him. We headed for the barn. Mr. Joe Sutter is a very large man, but I had to admit, as Soup and I were stuffing, pushing, and shoehorning our new Santa into Joe's red Santa suit, that Slosh was even a size larger. How we did it, I will never know, yet our final result was one magnificent Santa Claus with real white whiskers all his own. How do I look? He asked. Well, I told him, you're the biggest Santa Claus that this town will ever get to enjoy. Thanks, Luther, he told me. Both you boys are okay. I'm a lucky guy to be Santa. He smiled. Well, now all I do is ride this here little sleigh into town, right? Right, said Soup. Mr. Dubinsky looked confused. Where's the horses? We have another plan, Soup exclaimed. All we've got to do now is push the sleigh, plus our equipment, out of the barn and over to the lake. It's right nearby. Slosh stared at the mass of assorted junk that Soup had piled into the sleigh. What in blankety blank is all this blankety blank stuff? Soup grinned. It's going to be your Christmas present, but it's sort of a surprise. You won't guess what it really is till we push the sleigh over to the ice. So please help. As the barn door was open, plenty of snow had whirled inside, easing our job. The three of us, with mighty Mr. Dubinsky supplying most of the muscle, moved the little red sleigh out of the barn. Closed the door, then pushed it over the crusty snow and onto the ice of the frozen lake. The front of the sleigh pointed south toward Learning. That was the name of their town. The moonlight made the ice appear to be shiny and slick, polished by a fierce north wind. Now what? Asked Mr. Dubinsky. There ain't no horses here. I don't see no blankety blank horses. At this point, I was as confused as Slosh. He didn't know Luther Wesley Vinson as well as I did. Soup, with his demon of a brain, had cooked up some crazy idea which I now prayed would work. Meanwhile, Soup wasn't idle. Item by item, he yanked all of his strange equipment, mostly junk, from the sleigh, and it lay in a heap on the ice. I still don't get it, said Slosh, who was holding his large sack with one hand and the red Santa hat on his head with the other. The wind was really whipping. Soup pointed to the sleigh. Please climb aboard, Mr. Dubinsky, because we're almost ready to head for town. Giving my pal a doubting look and still muttering about our lack of horsepower, Slosh mounted the sleigh and sat on the single seat, holding the mysterious sack on his lap. Help me, Rob, said Soup, grabbing a bean pole. The two of us never worked faster. Following Soup's bewildering instructions, we wired two of the long bean poles to the front of the sleigh. They stuck straight up in the air. We tied ropes to the four corners of the great big horse blanket and knotted our ropes around the base of the two poles. Then we added the set of sleigh bells. We braced the edges of the horse blanket with poles, rather like a frame around a picture. It lay flat on the ice in front of the sleigh. It's finished, Soup told me, passing several loose ends of rope up to Slosh. Great, but what is it? Slosh wanted to know. Soup proudly smiled. A sail. For a blankety blank sleigh? Sure, said Soup in a confident voice that only the insane possess. So jump in, Rob, because we are all riding to Learning in style. Santa's on his way to town, he sang. Into the sleigh we jumped, taking what little seating was available. As Mr. Dubinsky and his sack occupied most of it, only half of my bottom had a seat. The other half hung over the edge. Slosh sat wedged between us. He was so large that Soup was out of my sight. Okay, said Soup, please pull on the ropes, Mr. Dubinsky. He pulled. Up, up, up rose the pole-framed horse blanket until it was vertical, high above our heads. At once it filled with air, and our little sleigh lurched forward, driven by a tenacious north wind. Tenacious. So this is what it looked like again. A sleigh with a sail. Hey, said Slosh, it really works. The sleigh was creeping at a steady rate, heading south toward town. All is well, I thought, breathing a deep and relieving sigh. But how do we steer? Asked Slosh. Easy, said Soup. We just sort of pull on either one rope or the other. Our sleigh picked up speed. It's a cinch, said Soup. We glide merrily along over the ice to Emerson's boat dock, right near the village square. They'll all hear us coming because of our sleigh bells. I had to admit Soup was right. We were sailing a sleigh, faster now, and our jingling bells seemed to be happier than we were. As our sleigh reached the widest and windiest part of the lake, our speed increased. We're going a bit rapid, said Mr. Dubinsky, tightening his grip on the ropes that he was holding. We were. Mr. Dubinsky was right. Our sleigh seemed to be gaining speed at a rather incredible rate. I don't like to ride fast, he said. Inside, I'm really kind of a gentle person, and I don't like riding fast. Rob, I heard Soup say, maybe there's a brake handle on your side. If there is, try pulling it back. Carefully hooking an arm around one of Mr. Dubinsky's, I looked over the edge, seeing nothing but the blur of gray ice as it sped below. There's no brake here, I told Soup. Maybe it's on your side. Soup apparently looked too. Nope, it's not on this side either. No brake? Asked Mr. Dubinsky in the tiniest little Cupid doll voice I'd ever heard. Don't worry, said Soup. I gotta jump off this blankety-blank thing, wailed Mr. Dubinsky as he started to rise from his seat. A sudden gust of north wind from the rear doubled our speed and kept Mr. Dubinsky seated. He fell back with a thundering thud. Ahead of us, the amber lights of Learning, Vermont were aglow and appeared to be racing towards us, growing bigger and brighter every second. I could see that luckily we were headed more or less in the proper direction toward Emerson's boat dock. Faster and faster we streaked. Below us, I heard the steel runners hiss along the ice. The hissing grew louder and louder, and so did our sleigh bells. We're out of control, yelled Mr. Dubinsky. Steer, hollered Soup. All we gotta do is pull on the rope so we glide into town, off the lake, and into all that soft snow at the village square. No, said Mr. Dubinsky, what we gotta do is take down that blankety-blank horse blanket. In a fury, he yanked on one of Soup's rotten old ropes. It snapped. Looking up, I saw that our top crossbar had somehow caught on the tips of the two upright poles, the points of which were now snagged into the fabric of the blanket. Lean, yelled Soup, so we can stop the sleigh in that soft incline of snow and coast to a stop. We're gonna crash, Mr. Dubinsky was screaming, and I don't like to ride so fast. It's scaring the blankety-blank out of me. Don't worry, said Soup. When people crash, they always stop. Lean, I yelled. We leaned. It didn't help. Our speed had now surpassed 100 miles an hour and was closing in on 200. Ahead of us was not the soft incline of snow, nor was it the boat dock. Through my wind-whipped and watering eyes, I now saw where we were heading, straight for the double zoomer. And that's the end of chapter 11.